From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, nationally syndicated across the country on the Biz Talk Radio Network and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio WYBC and 1490 AM WGCH Greenwich. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. The post-presidency of Bill Clinton, from issuing unpopular pardons on his way out the door at the White House to becoming perhaps the first global leader, and now perhaps on his way back in the door of the White House as the first spouse. That's all today on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Joe Conason, veteran political journalist. He's editor-in-chief of the National Memo and an editor-at-large at the Investigative Fund of the Nation Institute. He's the author of several books, including The Hunting of the President, the 10-year campaign to destroy Bill and Hillary Clinton. And his latest work is just out, Man of the World, the Further Endeavors of Bill Clinton. Welcome, Joe.
Good to be with you, Jim.
I thought we'd start off, we're taping this on the eve of the funeral of Shimon Peres. What was Clinton's relationship with him?
Extremely close. You know that Peres is going to be buried next to Yitzhak Rabin, the late prime minister, who shared the Nobel Prize with Shimon Peres and Yasser Arafat for the first peace accord, the Oslo peace agreement. And Clinton was deeply involved in every peace effort, as you know, right up until the final days of his presidency, as was Peres. And in the years following his presidency, Shimon Peres remained one of his closest friends in Israel. And every year, Clinton Global Initiative, Peres would come to New York, not just for that, but for the UN General Assembly, but also because he wanted to be with Clinton and spent a great deal of time with him. I met him more than once with Clinton.
All right, you traveled with Clinton, as you discuss in this book. You've known them, both of them, Hillary and Bill, for 20 years. Tell us a little bit what it's like to travel with them, what they're like, and has he changed over the last 20 years?
Well, you know, he turned 70 last summer, so he's changed, certainly, as we all do, and he's probably slowed down a bit. You know, he's what you see. You know, he's what you hear about. He's a charming, charismatic guy. He's intellectually voracious, reads constantly, loves to watch movies. He, until recently, has never needed much sleep, and so you'd be on a plane with him, usually a small plane, and there'd be a bunch of, you know, aides on it, other people mostly much younger than he is, and I remember this vividly. You know, it happened more than once. The plane would land in Westchester Airport where we were going home. Mm-hmm. You'd have a bump. Everybody else was asleep because it would be 1 a.m. or 4 a.m. or something like that. And you'd wake up, and there was Clinton in his corner of the plane with the light on, reading, sometimes writing, making notes. He works a lot. He reads a lot. You know, he's the same guy that he's been in a lot of ways, but he's getting older now. He is slowing down a bit. How would you describe the intelligence of him versus Hillary's? Is one smarter than the other? Is his form of intelligence different? Well, I wouldn't presume to say that. I mean, they have different strengths. I would say she's a serious policy person. He is too, obviously, but I think she's focused more in that way. He's a bit more naturally gregarious, you know, as everybody knows. He's a natural campaigner. She has to work harder at that. You know, I think there are a lot of people who know them better than I do who would tell you she's the smarter one. But I wouldn't presume to say that. He's pretty smart. Why do you think there's so much controversy that attends this couple? You know, he's been called Slick Willie and all of that stuff. She's getting beaten up for being almost considered to have Nixonian paranoia around the emails and her lack of transparency. Where do you think this comes from? Well, I would first of all argue with this lack of transparency idea. I don't think people expect to have all their emails spread before the public. You know, in the Bush White House, they destroyed 22 million emails, Jim, and they never got in trouble for it. So, you know, Colin Powell used his personal email. He destroyed all of them as Secretary of State. We don't have a single one. So I don't think she's that different from any other public figure in terms of her wish to keep private things private. But unlike any other public figure that I know of, she and her husband have published 39 years of tax returns.
Yeah.
39 years. Bernie Sanders had to have one tax return pulled out of him with the pliers, okay? And Donald Trump, has made up every reason in the world why he's never going to give them up, although he's promised to do it many times. He'll never do it.
Never do it. He doesn't pay any taxes.
Well, that's right. He finally admitted that the other night.
Yeah.
But he has paid some taxes in the past, so I should amend that a little bit. But it's not clear how much tax he's ever paid. So when people say there's no transparency, I would say, there's actually been a fair amount of the things we know about her, Jim, that are unflattering to her, we know because of her transparency. We know about the speeches to Goldman Sachs because they published them all in the tax returns. So, and as this extends to the foundation as well, the foundation is the only foundation I know of in America that has published the names of all of its donors, of whom there are 300,000. And they did that for a reason. They negotiated an agreement with President Obama about how to handle the question of transparency if she was going to be Secretary of State, which he pleaded with her to do. She didn't originally want to do it, and I go through all of that in the book, that process, which is pretty interesting. She put out a press release at one point saying she wasn't going to do it, or she drafted one anyway. And so if you want to talk about transparency, I would always say compared to who?
Okay.
Compared to what?
Let's one more thing on them, and then I want to move on. Is there anything to the health issue, the fading, and he doesn't look great often when you see him on? Should health be a concern for either or both?
When I've seen him, he looked okay to me, but I know lots of people say, well, his hand shakes.
Yeah.
And he does have one hand that shakes a bit, and there are days when he looks better and days when he looks worse.
Yes.
He's been on a vegan diet for more than 6 years now. And there are people who are critical of that choice and think that, he doesn't get enough iron in his diet and he needs more protein and that kind of thing. I haven't seen her for a while. I haven't seen her in person for more than a year. And the last time I saw her, she looked fine. But she had before she testified before the Benghazi committee, she had that incident where she got ill. She got a virus, and she fainted and knocked her head. And recovered from that and went before the committee. You remember that there were warring stories among conservatives about her at that point. So one side, I can't remember whether it was Karl Rove or Rush Limbaugh, was saying, well, she's faking it because she doesn't want to testify. And the other argument was, no, she's much, much sicker, and she can't testify because she's so sick she's practically dead.
Can't win.
And and they both turned out to be wrong. She showed up and she sat there for 11 hours, and I'll tell you, that's a tough thing to do. So I have to assume, and I don't have any inside knowledge about this, that if her doctors say she's healthy enough to be president, that she is. Okay.
One of the big revelations in the book, it's never really been out before that I've seen, is an explanation as to why Clinton would have walked out the door pardoning this guy that looked like a really bad guy, Mark Rich. He was a fugitive from the country. He'd aided Iran, an enemy of ours. And you kind of put the first explanation behind it. Tell us.
Well, so it's important to set the scene. In the final days of his presidency, Clinton was trying like mad to reach the end of a long process of a Middle East peace accord. Ehud Barak, who was then the Prime Minister of Israel, a Labor Party Prime Minister, had gone the extra mile and then the extra mile and then the extra mile in terms of concessions to Arafat to try to reach an agreement. At least that was certainly Clinton's view of it. Ehud Barak called Clinton up on 3 occasions in the final month or so of his presidency and said, including on the last night, January 19th, and asked him 3 times to pardon Mark Rich. And the question is why? And I interviewed Ehud Barak in Tel Aviv about this. I think I'm the first journalist he talked to on the record about this question. And he told me the reason was that an old army buddy of his, who had been with him in Israeli army intelligence when they were both young soldiers, worked for Mark Rich and had come to him and said, my boss wants a pardon. Here's what he has done for the state of Israel and for the United States as well. And it turned out, and Barak told me he investigated this himself, that Mark Rich had been serving as an asset of Israeli intelligence during his entire business career. And what that means is that he had done things like given places to work for Israeli agents abroad in countries that were otherwise unhospitable. More importantly than that, in countries like Yemen and Iraq and Iran, where there were still small Jewish communities at that time, he had gotten the authorities to agree to let these Jews leave, Jewish families leave, and go to Israel where they would be safe, because they were endangered in those places.
You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell over the Business Talk Radio Network, 350 stations around the country. And we'll finish up on Mark Rich, and we'll look into the Clinton Foundation in the next segment. And we're back with veteran political journalist Joe Conason. And we were talking, he's uncovered really the first rationale for why Bill Clinton would have made what looked like a very unpopular decision on his way out the door. Finish up on the Mark Rich pardon now, Joe.
Well, so Clinton, I think, felt obligated to Barak to fulfill that request if he could. He would tell you that there were other reasons why he thought it was a legitimate thing to do that had to do with the way the case was prosecuted and so forth. But in fact, it was an unorthodox thing to grant a pardon to a fugitive. The other thing I would say about it was not a full pardon. You know, Mark Rich never came back to the United States after the pardon was issued. And the reason was, if he had come back, the way Clinton had phrased the pardon, he would have been liable for up to $21 million in civil fines that he would have had to pay. So it wasn't a free and clear pardon by any means. It was investigated by the U.S. Attorney and by committees of Congress, and, you know, the members of the White House turned over the telephone conversations that are transcribed in the White House between Barak and Clinton. And at that point, the investigation in the House ended, and the U.S. Attorney cleared him as well. So the idea that he was bribed in some ways, there was never any evidence to show that. And I think the explanation that involves Ehud Barak is much more persuasive. The final thing I would say about that, there's a reason why he doesn't talk about it, which was that Barak, lost his seat as prime minister in the election shortly after that. Mm-hmm. And I think Clinton felt, why would I kick this guy, my friend, when he's down? I made this decision. He asked me to do it, but it's not his fault that I did it. And Hillary said to me at one point, there was no way he was going to publicly blame Barak or anyone else in Israel for what he decided to do.
In fact, it really encapsulates kind of a view of Clinton, which, one, this took a lot of guts not to try to defer the blame off of his shoulders, which sometimes people think that he's just a pandering kind of guy. But on the other hand, he didn't explain it, and he had a lot of anger and self-pity, which you also tend to associate with him, right? Well,
he was certainly angry because he was being, shafted from every direction at that point. And I think he certainly was angry. Self-pity is strong. I mean, I wasn't around him in those days, so I couldn't say that. But certainly he was unhappy and depressed at what was going on at that point. Okay, we're going to move to the Clinton Foundation now because it's a source of tremendous controversy. Number one, the book does a great job, and I'll let you go through some of this, at what he accomplished, the lives he saved, etc. It really was, the numbers are mind-blowing to me. But it's also a source of controversy. We had Charles Ortel on, and let me just quote from him. The Clinton Foundation is a charity fraud network engaged in an unprosecuted criminal conspiracy to operate in the guise of a public charity when it is instead an illegal money laundering and influence peddling scheme. And one of his things, which seems a little bit picayune, but he claims the original charter was to focus on presidential archives in the Clinton Library, and they never really updated it for this now global mission. And obviously, the pay-to-play and all the things that link with it. Give us your take on it. Well, I think Charles Ortel is a nut. Let's start with that. And I think it's a lot of word salad from him for which he has no evidence that I've ever seen. I mean, I've followed him a bit. I've read his articles. They're incomprehensible to me. You can imagine, Jim, that President Clinton has the best attorneys in the world working on the legal affairs of his foundation and his personal questions. I mean, Williams and Connolly, or his attorneys, represented him in the impeachment and the Paula Jones case, top law firm. I know the lawyer who represents the foundation, Martin Edelman. He's also one of the top lawyers in New York. I mean, Charles. I never heard of Charles Ortel, but I can assure you that if there were legal issues to be addressed, in the operations of the foundation, they have been addressed by these very competent lawyers. Okay, so let's dispose of that first. Secondly, what does he mean by a money laundering operation? Where did the money go? Bill Gates, for instance, just to take one example, Bill Gates has given millions and millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation, and he has audited their operations. Why? Because he wants to make sure that his money is being used for the purposes for which it was intended. And you know what? He's continued to give the money to them. Now, if Bill and Melinda Gates thought that their money was being misused or laundered by the Clinton Foundation, do you think they would be giving them their money? I don't think so. Do you think Bill Gates has enough money to hire a competent auditor? I believe he does. So we can dispose of that. And by the way, he's far from the only person who's audited their operations. Foreign governments have been giving money to Clinton since long before Hillary became Secretary of State because they wanted to help him address the AIDS crisis. And this is the biggest accomplishment of the foundation. You alluded to it before. They've saved millions of people's lives. How? By setting up a system that drove down the price of AIDS treatment and brought together a lot more money to pay for it so that people who were going to be left to die, and I mean, up to 100 million people, it would have been one of the greatest crimes in the history of the world to leave people untreated when we had the means, to treat them. He addressed this, along with President Bush, by the way, and evangelical ministers, a lot of people from both sides of the aisle got involved in this. The governments that paid for that, like the government of the UK, these are our allies, by the way. These aren't like enemy governments or any of that nonsense. These are the governments of the United Kingdom, Canada, Ireland, Norway, NATO members, friends of ours. They've audited these operations because they need to show their people that if they send $10 million to the Clinton Foundation, it's going to be spent properly because their parliament will ask them questions if nobody else does, right? So these accusations by Ortel are nonsense. James Carville said the other day that for people to attack the Clinton Foundation for political reasons when it is saving millions of lives, he said, and I can't do his accent, but he said, somebody's going to hell for this. And I have to tell you, I agree with that.
Now, we do a lot of business stuff on this show, and I'll tell you what really impressed me is that one of the first things you learn in manufacturing is going for economies of scale, meaning running as much volume as you can to get the prices way down.
Correct.
And here's a guy who has no business experience, and he got these ARV meds for HIV down from $15,000 a pop to about $350. The other part of it is execution is the whole thing, and these countries didn't have any infrastructure to get this stuff done, to get the shots done or whatever. Both of those he pulled off.
Hey, you really did read the book. Good for you. Well, listen, that's exactly right. It is an incredibly impressive story of a guy who is not a businessman, but is very interested in the way businesses operate, the way markets operate, and how you can harness the power of markets to bring more goods to people who need them. I think this is a humane purpose in life, and I think, a lot of business people actually want to do that too. So he found the people who wanted to do that. He found them in governments abroad. He found them in the generic pharmaceutical industry in other countries. He found them in China where they make the chemicals that go into those pharmaceuticals. And he said, look, this is a market failure, or what is sometimes termed a market failure, where we have a huge demand and we have the means to make a supply, and we can't find a way to match the demand and the supply. He found a way to do that. And he and Ira Magaziner, who's widely reviled for the failure of the health care plan in 1993. Ira went off, and he's a very competent guy, made a lot of money as a business consultant, and then came back and said to Clinton, this is something we could do.
And I'll say one thing as we go out that I was impressed. Everybody says the Clintons are owned by Wall Street and big business. Bill Clinton spent a lot of time fighting big pharma who were trying to protect their patents while, a lot of folks died in these African countries. You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. We'll be back with more on the Clinton post-presidency. We'll look at some real or not real Clinton scandals and more politics. We're back with Joe Conason. He's written a new book called Men of the World, The Further Endeavors of Bill Clinton, and it is a great book, very insightful. I think you just did a good job on sort of the hit job against the Clinton Foundation. But let me come from this angle, which is that the Clintons seem to be blind about conflict of interest. They've taken a lot of money from foreign governments, some that don't have great human rights regimes. I don't believe there's evidence of pay-to-play and stuff, but some of it doesn't smell very good. And in your book, you also said that they seem more upset about all the infidelity rumors than the conflict of interest rumors. Is that another example of being blind?
Well, I do say in the book, Jim, that I think they're not as sensitive to the way things might appear as would be good for them, considering the fact that she wanted to run for president. You know, I think anybody has to realize now that giving speeches to Goldman Sachs at $250 a pop was not a great idea, right? $250 large. I mean, that just didn't make sense. So, given the reputation of that company. On the other hand, I will say that, you know, when she, and I think most people don't know this, but she told this to me, when she left the State Department and went on the speaking circuit, you know, for Harry Walker Agency, which represents her husband, she told them no foreign speeches, even though the foreign speech market was enormous and actually pays more than Americans generally do. Why? She was worried about how that would look, having been Secretary of State. So it's not that they're totally insensitive or they don't pay any attention to it, but, and I'll also say, they set up a deal concerning conflict of interest when Barack Obama asked her to serve as Secretary of State. And, you know, since you've read the book, you know, she didn't really want to do that at first. And she drafted a statement saying she wasn't going to do it. And Obama convinced her, I think partly out of just duty to country. You know, when the president asks you to do something, you do it. But she said to him, what do I do about my husband's foundation? He's saving many people's lives. He has a lot of things he wants to do. He collects money from foreign governments to do some of it, and has for a long time. What do we do about that? And Obama set forth a series of conditions that involved the State Department Ethics Office and disclosures of who all the donors were. They agreed to everything he asked, Jim. They did everything he wanted, including revealing the names of every donor who had ever given money to the foundation retroactively. So they had to tell people who had given them a lot of money in the past, hey, we're going to publish your name now, even though we told you before that we weren't going to. So if people have a problem with how this all unfolded, they need to take it up with Obama, you know, because he's the one who set the rules, and they agreed to everything he asked.
Interesting, and you do a great job in the book, I think, too, of really showing what I don't know if joke is too much of a word, that the Whitewater investigation was $73 million spent, and really nothing found other than Ms. Lewinsky.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know well that amounted to zero, and in fact, the Clintons lost money on Whitewater. So, you know, I one of the things that occurs to me all the time is, as one of the very few reporters who ever questioned that supposed scandal, when people now say, well, you're just defending the Clintons and, you know, how can you say there's no scandal here with the foundation? I'll say, my impulse is to say, you know what? You should look at what I said 20 years ago, because I was right then. Gene Lyons, who was my writing partner on Hunting the President, who got onto this before I did, we were ahead of the game, and we've been vindicated. So maybe, just maybe this time, people ought to pay attention to what we're saying about this.
Okay, I want to get into more post-presidential stuff, but one thing that does bother me is the hanging around and flying on planes with Ron Burkle, Jeffrey Epstein, who was a convicted pedophile, and some of these other guys that I don't know whether, again, that's blindness or what the heck he's doing on a plane.
Well,
with these...
Jim, let's take them one at a time.
Okay, go ahead.
Because it's important to separate these out and understand each case. Jeffrey Epstein was, I reveal in the book that Jeffrey Epstein was the person who put up the money to start the Clinton Global Initiative in the first place. And the truth about him is that his pedophilia, his sleeping with underage girls, was not revealed until quite a long time after all of that unfolded. So Clinton, when he was using Epstein's plane to go to Africa, for instance, or accepting money from him to start CGI, which they paid back, I don't think they knew about his misconduct, his sexual misconduct.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one case. Although people, again, what happens is the timelines get compressed. Excuse me. And, so it sounds like, well, it's as if he's flying on the plane with him while he's with these girls. That's not what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Ron Burkle, I'm not sure what the issue is with Ron Burkle. I mean, I don't know him, but he's a self-made guy. I don't think he's ever been accused of any criminal activity that I know of. So, Clinton tends to gravitate to guys like that who started out with nothing.
All right, talk now as we get into some of these amazing relations with ex-presidents. The whole relationship with George H.W. Bush 41 is pretty amazing, and the impact of going into Haiti and places like that. Talk about that relationship.
Well, so that relationship with the first Bush president, H.W., began, they'd known each other for a long time, and they were friendly, but the closeness, which I have heard depicted as almost a father-son relationship, and certainly former President Bush has said that himself, really began when the second President Bush asked them to go and raise money for victims of the Asian tsunami. And they went out to Asia together, and they really bonded on that trip, became very close, and they're still close to this day. I think it's interesting because, of course, Clinton was the one who drove him out of the White House originally in that 1992 election. So you would think they could never get along. But, as President Bush said, there is a special bond among the people who have served in the White House. I mean, they have taken on a responsibility that really nobody else can understand. And I think that brings them together in a way that can be special. And these two guys also just like each other. I mean, Clinton was very solicitous of him. He admires him. So they established a real relationship.
Is the relationship with Mandela similar in terms of the father figure kind of thing?
I think that's correct. Mandela, got to know Clinton when they were both in office. He stood up to defend him during impeachment. I don't know if you remember that. It's a very funny scene where Mandela comes to New York and says something like, I don't want to interfere in the internal affairs of this country, but you guys should keep your hands off my friend. So that was the beginning. And, Mandela was alienated from his own family. He had spent 27 years in prison.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And his children came to resent him. His first wife and he divorced soon after he got out of jail, and he had a lot of trouble in his own family. And he came to really love Clinton, and they became very, very close. Clinton would go to Africa every year. He would sort of build his Africa trip around Mandela's birthday, so he could be in Johannesburg around the time of his friend's birthday. And they just were extremely... I was with Clinton a couple of times with Mandela and got to meet him myself, which was an amazing experience. And you could just tell how happy Mandela was to see Clinton and to be with him and to just have him around.
How would you describe... maybe he just navigated this so politically well, but there was competition or contention between George W. Bush's AIDS initiative and Clinton's, and in the Obama administration there was the North Korean folks that he rescued, and then the administration's trying to keep it under the table so he doesn't get any publicity. How did he deal with all that?
Well, with Bush, I think... it was what Bush wanted to do was a very good thing, and it arose out of the evangelical community that Bush was part of. They realized that it was a terrible thing to let people die without treatment of AIDS. And Bush decided to come up quite secretively. He and a few of his aides came up with the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, which he announced in the State of the Union in 2003. Clinton by then had already become active on the same front, but with far fewer resources. And they clashed at first because the Bush program was controlled by big pharma representatives, who you alluded to before, who didn't want to use generic drugs. But the problem with that was you could never afford to really treat very many people if you used branded pharmaceuticals. Eventually, Clinton persuaded Bush to have them tested, by the FDA and make sure they worked, and then allow our funds to pay for them. And the program was much more successful as a result. They're working together, excuse me, across partisan and ideological lines was really an incredible boon to millions of people.
You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell from our flagship stations, Yale Radio, WYBC, and WGCH, 1490 AM Greenwich. We're going to look at the legacy of Bill Clinton in our last national segment. And we're back with journalist Joe Conason, long covered Bill Clinton. First off, in legacy terms, is Clinton in a way the first global president?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, a lot of our presidents have taken on global responsibilities, Jim, as you know. But I think he may be the first global post-president. He certainly has had reach around the world in Clinton Global Initiative, in his health programs, in a lot of the other climate change programs, other things he's tried to do. And I think the respect and affection that people feel for him in other countries does not fluctuate the way it does here. When a member of the family, notably his wife, runs for office, their popularity ratings both plunge.
Yeah.
In the other years when nobody's running, she'll be named by Gallup as the most admired woman in the country, and it's happened 20 or 25 times, and his ratings go up, stratospherically.
What's interesting?
Abroad, overseas, that's not the case. He's sort of continuously liked and admired in most countries. So.
It strikes me that her politics detracts from his statesmanship, and his charisma detracts from her likability. Yes. It's interesting.
Both of those things have some validity, and yet, they feel very strongly about maintaining the partnership that they've had all these years. And, I always say, actually, Gene Lyons taught me this, anybody else's marriage is another country where you don't speak the language.
Exactly. In fact, I want to get to legacy stuff, but I want to give you 30 seconds or whatever you need. Both of them. The relationship is real, right? There's this separate lives kind of thing because they're apart so much. But give us, briefly encapsulate the relationship as you understand it.
Well, I'll just tell you that whenever I've traveled with him, she's always the first person he calls on the phone. Whenever something happens, he has a meeting, he talks to anybody, they're on the phone if they can find each other wherever they are in the world all the time. I mean, every day. And, I covered her Senate race, Jim, in 2000, her first Senate race. I went upstate with her, and it was the same thing. If you happen to, be watching her at a moment, she'd be getting into the back of a car, and she'd pick up the cell phone and call him right away, and just to tell him about, a campaign event or whatever it was. They are very close in that way.
Okay, what does he see as his major successes the presidency and major failures?
Well, in the presidency, I would say, first of all, at this point, he talks about the number of jobs he created, which is still, I think, the record number of any president. I could be wrong about that, but it's a very high number, somewhere around 24 million.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. I think he would talk about the level of poverty going way down when he was president and the minimum wage going up. So those kinds of achievements. And
balanced budget is a big one for me.
I think he was happy that he brought the budget into balance, although I would tell you he would say that's not the only value. There are times when you need to go into deficit in order to stimulate, and he believes in that too. I would say as far as, on foreign policy issues, I think the Northern Ireland peace agreement and what they did in Bosnia stand out for him in a lot of ways. Now,
on the other side, I'll throw a couple out at you. The Rwanda genocide, not getting Bin Laden, Middle East peace, and Glass-Steagall and the commodities exchange, not regulating derivatives.
Let's take those in reverse order.
Okay.
I think he would argue with you about Glass-Steagall and say that was not what caused the crash, and that he would defend he would say most of Glass-Steagall was gone by the time it was repealed.
The derivatives issue, though, commodities.
The derivatives he would agree with you about, and there's a really interesting angle on that, Jim, that nobody ever talks about, which is there was one official in his administration who was right, and that was Brooks Lee Bourne.
Yes.
Who was the head of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission.
Yep.
Do you know where she came from? She was Hillary Clinton's best friend at the American Bar Association.
Right. Well, it's too bad they didn't listen to her.
Women.
Unfortunately.
Yes, but she got that job. She was a candidate for Attorney General. She got the CFTC as a kind of consolation prize, but all that was because of Hillary. So there's that. I think Clinton would agree with you about Rwanda. If every time I've talked to him about this, and I've been to Rwanda with him two or three times, he would say that was by far the worst thing that happened. Much worse than impeachment. Much worse than, if you asked him what disgraced him as president, he would say Rwanda.
Interesting.
So,
do you think that he could not touch innate greatness because of the self-destructive side of him? Is there some sort of duality there?
Well, he did harm himself. I mean, there's no question about that. You can't really argue that there wasn't an impulse that he was unable to control that harmed his legacy. No question about that. And, I think he wouldn't argue with that.
Okay, let's go to the Hillary Clinton. I'm sorry to rush you, but there's
that's okay.
The Hillary Clinton presidency, if that were to happen, all this experience that he have a chance to bring back, the mistakes he made and things he's now learned. What do you see him? How do you see him contributing? Would he do Middle East peace? Would he do domestic economy? What do you think?
I think he'd be sort of a minister without portfolio. He'd probably be called upon to do a number of things.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to tell you what I think he would be interested in, I think he has great diplomatic skills, and I'm sure she would call on him to use those, whether in the Middle East or somewhere else, probably more than one place. Domestically, I think, there's a combination of issues that I think would interest him a lot, which is he's very concerned about climate change. He has been ever since he first met Al Gore and got to know him. But his niche in that is the clean energy transition and how it could create jobs and grow the economy. He really cares about that. He knows a lot about it. And it would fit with the broader goal of, moving the economy forward and employing more people. So
okay, all right.
I could see him doing that.
Okay, what about what's going to happen to the Clinton Foundation, the CGI, and is Chelsea going to take it over?
Well, CGI is over. They held the last one last week, so that's going out of business. And I think they've sort of decided they would declare victory. They've had a big influence on philanthropy, and that's done. The foundation, I think, is going to be pulled apart. The bigger parts of it, like the health initiative, may be taken over by other foundations. The Clintons are stepping off of the board of that part of it. And as for the rest of it, it's not clear what will happen, except that it will all be advanced in a way that doesn't create conflicts of interest for her as president.
Has he read your book, and do you have any comments, feedback from him?
He read my book, and after it was at the printer already, he wasn't allowed to read it until then, and he told me that he liked it. So.
I have to say, it is a fascinating read. There's a lot of revelations in it, and you can't help but realize the guy's done a lot of good stuff in his post-presidency. Great thanks to Joe Conason. The book is Man of the World, The Further Endeavors of Bill Clinton. You can access our podcast on iTunes. You've been listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Thanks again to Joe Conason. Thanks to our national audience for listening, and we'll see everybody next Sunday on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. A former Clinton insider takes us through the rise of the Clintons from Little Rock to Washington, D.C., and through his own rise and fall, ending in prison and rising again, riding the Clinton roller coaster with Webb Hubbell today on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Webb Hubbell was Associate Attorney General in the U.S. Department of Justice under President Clinton, served as Chief Justice of the Arkansas Supreme Court, Mayor of Little Rock, Managing Partner in the Rose Law Firm with fellow partner Hillary Rodham Clinton, currently an author of fiction novels and a nationally recognized speaker on government, business, and leadership. His newly revised version of his book just out, Friends in High Places, Webb Hubbell and the Clintons' Journey from Little Rock to Washington, D.C., his two works of fiction, When Men Betray and Ginger Snaps. Welcome, Webb. We're out of time after all that. All right,
Thank you for having me, Jim.
It's our honor.
Looking forward to the day.
I want to get to obviously the most critical, most important subject, golf with President Clinton. How was that?
That was a lot of fun. It was the one way that both of us could escape from politics and talk about things that nobody would believe we were talking about when we'd get back off the golf course.
Okay, be honest. How good is he?
He's not a bad golfer. He's actually about a 10 handicap. He's much better than I was. But he never practiced. He would walk straight out on the course and start playing. He never practiced.
It just amazed me that you would be walking up the driveway of the White House lugging your clubs.
Yeah, that was kind of funny. And especially one time I came out and had my clubs, and somebody looked at me and said, "What were you playing golf inside there?" And I said, "No, we had been playing." They go, "Gosh, you must be somebody important to play golf at the White House."
All right, are we en route to our first woman president?
I believe so. I really do believe so.
Okay, so then go back to the Rose Law Firm, and did you see her as a potential president back then?
No, I mean, I have to admit, at first we didn't even see Bill or the president as a future president. You know, we were from a small state, and you never imagined that somebody you knew well, someone who was your friend, would ever be president of the United States. And now it looks like I'm going to know two of them.
Throughout your book, you basically say that it was increasingly difficult for Hillary to be the real Hillary. Who is the real Hillary?
Well, I think we're seeing some of those issues right now. It is hard. She's a very private person, is very caring and loving of her daughter and her mother and other people. Some issues are very important, and she has a hard time, putting a public face, on the caring person she is. She's also got a great sense of humor. And I'd liken it to, Al Gore, when he privately was one of the funniest people I've ever met. But you didn't see it when, the cameras turned on. And I think the campaign's trying to portray that, but it's very difficult. People in front of the camera are not necessarily the same as they are off.
Yeah, Ed Klein's got a book out on her recently, and he maintains a lot of time we elect the guy that's most likable. You'd rather have a beer with George W. Bush, as you said, versus Gore. Does she have a likability issue?
I think that, I think it's been created. I think one-on-one, people will tell you she's as likable and fun as anybody they've ever met. Okay. I think it's a matter of whether that can be conveyed, in the hostile environment that running for president is these days.
Yeah, nowadays. The other thing that it sort of bothered me is she showed some Nixonian tendencies. Nixon taped himself, and she puts a private email server in her home, which just where is that from? Is she so paranoid now, the press?
No, I think from the early days back in Arkansas, she was very, she wanted to have her own life as a lawyer. It wasn't a political life. She thought, her husband was a lawyer, but she could have a private life. She could drive her own car. She could go out to lunch with who she wanted to. And all of a sudden, everything she did was, on center stage. And that's a difficult adjustment. I think with the server, I think she was badly served, so to speak. I mean, that's a bad pun, but, I think she probably, the way it began is somebody said, well, now, when you do State Department business, you got to do this, and when you do personal business, you do this. And she says, how am I going to keep it apart? And somebody says, well, we'll come up with a way to do it. But she can't blame those people who came up with this idea. She's just got to live with it, and I think she should have, just from the very first, said it was a mistake. But it's hard for a politician to admit they make mistakes.
Tell the story now of the first time you saw both of them. You were taking your law, and it's a great story. It's a metaphor for who they are. The way.
Well, I like to say I met the president and now the future president at the State Mental Institution. And it is true. We actually took the bar exam back then at the state hospital where the mental patients were. There's a big auditorium there, and that's where we took the bar exam. And I I had gone to Arkansas, did not know who Bill or Hillary were, and I came out one time during a break between exams, and there they are, and Bill is just talking to everybody and meeting everybody, and Hillary's sitting on a rock in a Yale sweatshirt, by the way, and then every now and then she would just tug on his sleeve, and he'd go back to talking about the bar exam. And a friend of mine who knew them well, he said, "Come on, I want you to introduce him. He's going to be governor one day." And I said, "Well, who's she?" And he says, "Oh, that's his brains."
What do you think about that, by the way? He's supposed to be brilliant. She's supposed to be brilliant. Is she his brains, or?
They're totally different intellects. You know, Bill is breadth where she's focused, but they're both brilliant. I mean, I don't think even her worst enemies will admit she's as smart as a tick.
Let me ask you this. This is my own little thing that the perception is Hillary is this tough cookie and he's just a soft guy. He's too nice. And I have this feeling that it's the exact opposite, that he is tough as heck in the core and she's much more vulnerable behind her core.
I think you've got it right. You've got it right.
Okay, let's ask the $64,000 question. What is it? What's their marriage? What's it like? I mean, what?
Well, you know, I saw it a long time ago. I saw it, and they were in love. Very early on, you would see them together. They were holding hands. They were in love. I suspect it's gone through some rocky periods, but all of us have. You know, I've been married for 44 years, and I can't say everything's been perfect.
I can agree with you. 32 for me. What was her relationship with Vince Foster?
They were very close friends. Very close friends. I mean, he was, to some extent, he was the guy who wanted her to come to the Rose firm, recruited her. They worked closely together on files and cases. He admired her intellect, and he was brilliant as well, in a different kind of way. And they were good friends.
And we'll have more on Vince, obviously, a little later.
Yeah.
As we get to the end of this segment, tell us, we'll dig deeper later, but Webb Hubbell now, what you're doing, etc.
Okay. I'm writing novels. I have started doing something I've always wanted to do. I believe that there's a novel in each and every one of us. Hopefully, in my case, there's more than one. I've been published twice, and now we're working on a third set in D.C.
You know, it's funny because people may not know, but you're a big guy, and you played football. We'll talk about it. And in the book, you say Marcia Scott said that you were really a poet inside of a football guy, and I guess that's what you are, right?
I guess I am at this point. She always saw me as a gentle giant, my friend Marcia, and I think a lot of people did. But I did play football, but I had a good time doing it. But it's not many people who can say at my age that I'm having the best time of my life. Right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, just describe what you're doing, you know, kind of clinically, but coming from the depths of hell, from prison, from you know, walking to the White House with your golf clubs to a prison. I mean, how did you get yourself off the ground?
Well, it was tough. It wasn't easy, but I had great support from my family. My wife stuck with me through all of this. And then my good friends, and a lot of them were my football teammates. You know, kind of the foxhole buddies. Well, the modern foxhole buddies are your football teammates. And they helped me pick up, and then I am literally having the time of my life at age 67.
It's a great story. We're talking with Webb Hubbell. Talk a little bit about prison and mainly how it changed you.
One of the things, you know, I may be the only person in the world who flew on Air Force One and Con Air in the same year.
Wow.
And I can tell you which one's better, but I bet you can guess. It was life-changing, obviously. At first, you're scared to death. Even though I'm a very big man, you're still scared to death. But I think prison is like a lot of times, difficult times that people have. If you have the right attitude, it can change you. It change you for the better. And it forced me to, you know, be introspective. I had a lot of time. That's the one thing you always have in prison is time. Time to think and time to reevaluate your life. And I learned to live in simplicity. You know, I had I lived in a cubicle with 5 other guys, and had 2 pairs of khakis and 2 pairs of underwear, and yet I was fine. 3 meals a day, you miss your family. It teaches you what's important in your life, how much family and friends are, and it forced me to slow down my life and really place value on the things that really are important: family and friends and one's faith.
Did on the people pleaser sort of weaknesses? Did you address that? Have you sort of less yes to everything?
Well, I don't have anything to say yes with, but I think that's still a hard thing to overcome for me. But hopefully I do a little bit better job.
In the book, you say conflicted soul, the cynical maelstrom of politics and power. Was your idealism was stripped from you? Have you got some of that back? How conflicted are you?
I've got a lot of that back, although it's hard not to be cynical about the politics of today.
Yeah.
It really is. But I think I got some of that idealism back, and I hope it's reflected in the novels I'm writing. I like to look on the world a little bit better, and through fiction novels, you can create a better world. And you can point out the faults, but you can have the good guys win, so to speak.
Does it translate this change from you talked about how emotional stress affected you with drinking and gaining weight up and down? Yeah. Is your weight down and all that now?
Oh, my weight still yo-yos.
I have that problem.
I have a feeling it has more to do with my eating than my stress these days, and my age, where it's hard to get the exercise I need to. And that was one of the great things about prison, is that you didn't overeat, and you could become very, very healthy.
You lost 70 pounds, I think you said.
Yeah.
Now, where are you on having been there on prison reform? You talk about the prison look, the almost desperate hopelessness of people.
Right, and a lot of people who I was in prison with could be better served not in it, and certainly not for the length of time they were in it. One time, Dan Rostenkowski and I talked about it. We both agreed that for a first-time nonviolent offender, 1 year is plenty. You miss everybody's holiday, you miss every birthday, miss every Christmas. You know what prison is like, and it's another thing that I've learned a lot about is the restrictions that we put on people coming out of prison, and that's still not being addressed. There are 45,000 laws in this country that prohibit people who've gone to prison from working. And that makes it very difficult for people to rehabilitate.
And that ends up in recidivism, right?
Right.
Looking back at you and your folks in the Clinton presidency, he had what's considered, I think, a largely successful presidency. Was the toll too high, though?
The toll was high on his friends.
Yeah.
I remember one time getting the number that over 100 employees in the White House ended up with legal bills of over $100,000.
Wow.
We lost good people, Vince certainly being the most visible, but others burn out. It is an exhausting toll on your friends and your friendships.
What, in your mind, would a Hillary Clinton presidency look like? It would not be just another Bill Clinton presidency, would it?
Oh, I don't think so at all. I think it'd be a difference where there would be 2 or 3 issues that she would focus on. They wouldn't be as a shotgun approach, more of a precise, let's tackle this one issue. Certainly we have plenty to tackle. Her passion a long, long time ago, and that's one of the reasons why I'm glad the book is being reissued, was education. And I think for a lot of people in this country, our education system is broken and really needs the attention that it hadn't gotten in decades.
That focus, you talked about that before. You see education. Do you see any other pillars of intense focus?
Well, I mean, having been a Secretary of State and the Middle East, all the problems in the Middle East, I'm sure that would be a focus. One of the things people aren't talking about, and I think is one of the biggest issues. Hillary, when she was First Lady, when she was in Arkansas, learned to work with both sides, and people had great respect for her when she was a senator.
Yeah.
And I think if you ask 9 out of 10 people on the street, they would say, what is the one thing we have to do? And it's going to say, we need these people to start working together. We got too many problems for them to be, all they're doing is fighting. And I think Hillary brings that.
I hope they give her a chance because, the Clinton name just causes polarization.
Well, that is an issue. I mean, is it so polarizing that nobody will work with her? And I think if anybody can overcome it, it's Hillary.
All right, we're down to just a few seconds. I just want to say and give you a chance to say something. Obviously, you must be a good man because your entire family and friends stood with you. You talk about in prison, most wives take off. So just finish off with that.
Well, I'm very fortunate. I am. People ask me about Ken Starr, and I say he did me a favor. He taught me what's important in life, and it is those family and friends, and that's all I care about right now.
Well, thanks to Webb Hubbell. That was a fast hour. The book, again, is Friends in High Places, Webb Hubbell and the Clintons' Journey from Little Rock to Washington, D.C., the revised version published by Beaufort Books. He's got 2 fictional thrillers out, as he was alluding to, Ginger Snaps and When Men Betray. This has been Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Thanks to Webb Hubbell. Thanks to our national audience for listening. We'll see you next Sunday on Business Talk with Jim Campbell.